people? How do I get things done? So this becomes very, very important suddenly, because from an external perspective, who you partner with, how do they operate? Do they work with integrity? Do they have best practice policies in place? Becomes very, very important. Shareholders, are you going to invest in this? So every shareholder, us as individuals, I'm sure, will think twice about where we put our money. So from that perspective, they were going through a huge change transformation, and we were involved in helping lead that from a people perspective. The first aspect of our work was to reorganize the HR team from a bottom-up perspective, so we wasn't like, this is how we think it should be shaped. Actually, implement the system, let's minimum customization of that system to drive efficiency, and then let's draw the processes up from that systems perspective up and redesign job roles, redefine the competencies needed, therefore, for those job roles, and then redefine the structure. And in that one piece alone, we saved a 20% manpower efficiency. We had 80 people in the HR department, and we drove a 20% efficiency just from remapping processes to the system. So, here was HR leading a piece of work that was mapping process swim lanes, calculating the work volumes, etc., etc. But the interesting thing, it wasn't about cutting people back. We redesigned the organization to form a more strategically focused HR structure, one that had learning and development focus in it, one that had a business support function in it, where people were aligned to the business and were able to, one that had an organizational development focus in it. So we added new roles into the organization to help shift from transactional based to actually more aligned to the business and strategic focus. And then we worked on recruitment. Also from that perspective, how are we going to add value? The organization had redefined its organizational structure. So it looked very different. A new CEO was coming in, a COO, C-levels across the organization, new divisions were created, and this is what the new corporate structure, a new commercial focus on how sales were going to happen. It wasn't just about servicing the local airline anymore. They wanted to bring in more and more customers. So actually, whilst business was continuing and without affecting business, it was our role to displace 80 managers from their positions, to find a fair and equitable best practice approach on how you reselect the right skills to the right roles. So whilst business continued, and there had to be, one of the principles of that restructure was please make sure business doesn't get interrupted. Please make sure people are treated fairly. Our shareholders said, I don't want anybody to call me to say they've been treated unfairly and they don't know why they haven't been selected for a job, etc. So we went through this process where we had to communicate with employees and make sure that people understood why the changes were happening, what was the impact on them, and therefore what were the choices they might have to make. Very, very important until that engagement, because of course, put yourself in that shoes. Your organization is going through a change, you know it's happening, what do you start to think? What do I do? What's going to happen? What's going to happen to my job? That new structure that's been put on the wall there, well, my job doesn't exist in that, so what happens to me? And I've been working very hard. So very, very important to think through planning on how you're going to address these issues. Sorry, can you go back? The new telecoms company in Dubai, not so new now, they've been around now for 3 years, doing very well. I was fortunate enough to be engaged with them for about 18 months when they first started. I'd never worked in a telco before. That was my first experience of working in a telco. It was also my first experience of working in a launch environment. So I came from 22 years in with a company with a heritage back in the UK, and suddenly I'm in a different industry and I'm in a new environment altogether. So for 18 months, my focus was about learning what the business needed. But I knew that I had the right tools, I had the right experience, I had the right to be able to, good HR practices can be applied across industries. So it was understanding what the business needed, and what the business needed from us in that perspective was readiness to respond. So readiness to launch to market. Focus entirely was not on the customer internally. Of course, it was about attracting top talent, but it was everything we did had to be linked to the external customer, because there was such a high-profile company being launched here, a new entrant into the market, and everybody's eyes externally from a PR perspective were focused on what is this going to bring. So how we recruited people, how we treated them, the values, etc., the induction, etc., all of that was very, very important, but that contributed to what this company was going to be about. were fortunate to work with private equity of HSBC, and very interesting here, there was a sale on the cards. So the business was going, the shareholders were going to, sorry, can you go back, please? There was a sale on the cards, and therefore, where we were called in here was to really put in best practices HR, so that when that sale happened, the organisation was seen as a corporate organisation that had good practices in place. So from the basics of equity and pay, writing job descriptions, putting in a job evaluation and grading structure, writing policies, making sure that they were not only written in line with the law, but implemented in line with the law, and putting in a very, very basic performance management structure for the first year, because something complex was not going to be fit for purpose. Putting in a performance management where everybody had a conversation at the end of each year was the focus on what was needed in that organisation. And the last one was Abu Dhabi Airports Company, which was privatisation of a government sector, the Department of Civil Aviation, making a shift, setting up a commercially driven airports company that hopefully is going to go and run airports all over the world. Interesting thing, when we went on to this assignment, the shareholder, who was really the person that the board had engaged us on this assignment, said, we need to privatise, and we need to go from 1,200 people to 600 people in 6 weeks. We need to issue new contracts, and these are the rates of pay, which are lesser than what the government was paying. And that was a mammoth task. It had been on the table for a year, nothing had been done. But the interesting thing was, the shareholders saw that as the task. That was completed in 6 weeks, and we had 650 new contracts signed of employees to transfer onto. 650 contracts signed, lots and lots of conversations, you can imagine, a mapping of grading, a mapping of job roles, a mapping of salaries. I'm not happy, I was getting more, I've been here so long. 600 people were managed out of the business, UAE nationals and expatriates. But the focus was, even the shareholder did not realise actually how were we going to add value. The value add was not to make this paper transition. The value add was actually, why are we setting up a new company? What is the difference? Why will someone from yesterday do anything different or think differently or behave differently by signing a new contract today? So really, we had to work very closely with the board to say, okay, brilliant, that paper exercise is done. But actually, do people understand why you've set up a new company? Do they understand why Abu Dhabi is building a new airport? Do they understand what you're expecting them to do differently if you're going to be a performance-driven organisation? So actually, from an HR perspective, we were educating the board level to say, we need to do it. First intervention was a program where everybody in the organisation, whether they were a baggage handler or a VP of the organisation, came together and we talked about the future strategy of the organisation. Why, what, how, and we're all in this together. And then we put in the practices. So very interesting. So in terms of seizing new opportunities, what can I say to you? Here, I think, is quite a nice slide which just looks at really the complete HR system. And what I would say to you in this is, consider the full HR system. It's not value add from one perspective and not the other. Look at what you do today and really think about how HR can drive competitive advantage. What is it that we need to be doing that drives competitive advantage to add market value? Because then, once we become such a forward-thinking, enabled a part of the business, you become the heartbeat of the business. You become a valued partner of the business that doesn't go off and do what they've been told to do around the table, but actually you're looking to drive decisions, you're looking to drive ideas and strategy, and you're thinking ahead. So if I'm a CEO, I expect my HR function to be sitting around the table telling me how and what needs to be done to deliver the strategy. What I don't want to do, because I might as well do that job myself, is tell them now go off and do this. So if we can make that mind shift, and it's about thinking differently and really going away and questioning yourself in terms of what role does HR play in an organisation. So think of it more holistically and say, okay, where is it? By what aspect of this am I going to, or are we going to, as an HR function, contribute to delivering competitive advantage? Thank you. So, finally, a few thoughts for consideration. Understand your business. If you go in the morning and you sit in your office, you're never in touch with the people out there on the floor, then think again, because you're not going to be in touch with your business. Get out there, talk to your people. You should be meeting with your line managers regularly. That our jobs are not about being in an office. Because if you are in an office 90% of your time, then there's something strongly you need to think differently. Know who your customer is, and if you know who your customer is, you'll know what it is that adds value. Interesting, we recently are establishing a new office in Abu Dhabi, and one of our clients, we've talked to them around taking a new office in Abu Dhabi, downsizing the office in Dubai. From a cost perspective, we've involved them in that decision because they're a critical part of our business, because that's a lot of where our revenues are coming at the moment. So to make that decision without their involvement would have been quite short-sighted from our perspective. So consider the role of HR. Is HR a support function to the business, or is it a critical aspect of the business? How do you want to position that? Customer perception. How do customers see you? Someone said to me once back in Du, when I first started in the UAE, but HR's always just gone off and we tell them what to do and they go off and do it. Why are you questioning this? Why are you challenging this? So do they see you as a process, or do they actually see that you'll add value and bring something back? Understand what your customer values. So that's about being in touch with your customer, understanding the business to say, and make sure that you check with them what is going to be value add. You can have some quick wins along the way by that sort of approach. And realign measures so that they are business driven as opposed to HR driven. Don't think that's the measure I want to report on. I'll turn up at the management teaming with a nice long management report that said that we did this, 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 and this. If your colleagues around the table, that peer group around the table, can't see that added value, then I think you're measuring the wrong things. And importantly, we talk about best practice, best practice, best practice. Well, I'm fortunate enough to come from a best practice place, but actually my biggest learning in the last 5 years is maintain that best practice approach, but what is fit for purpose? Every organization, every time you look at a different scenario, it's got to be fit for purpose. You may aim to get to best practice, but it may be in a phased approach. Giving somebody something off the shelf that says this is, what Ulrich said about this and this is how we should be doing it is not going to work. The amount of companies that we go and speak to, and they'll say, well, we had a consultancy in before, and they left us a solution, but it's sitting on the shelf. So how we measure ourselves is around how well our solutions get implemented. So small steps sometimes is a better way that make a difference. And of course, your HR competence. So what is the competence of your team? What is the strength, the capability, not from just individuals, but your practices, your processes, and your systems? We really need to think. If you can convince your senior teams about how you can add more value by automation, for example, by changing policy, if you can quantify those recommendations and say this is how, and then deliver it, you'll build a partnership of trust and open communication, which definitely pays off. Okay? So I think I hope that was useful to you. A little bit of my experience in the region particularly, and how much I've had to learn. So thank you very much.
I would like to have, if you people have any questions for Ms. Asma. Ms. Adil, please. Can I have a mic for that, please? Sure.
Thank you. My question is, you mentioned at one point that effective HR also needs to measure the effectiveness of what it's doing. And in the various items that you listed, you also mentioned market value. I was just trying to think through in my mind, how would you measure market value linked with HR?
Okay. Let's talk about the example of HSBC. So this was a heavy engineering company that had been based in Jebel Ali. They have around 1,600 employees doing a great job. They build oil rigs, cranes and what have you, so steel fabricators.